Alright, today I'm going to show you a little bit more about some more advanced modifiers. I've made some videos about some of the beginning modifiers that you need specifically for architectural visualization. Now I'm going to do some more advanced ones, and to demonstrate the use of them I'm going to make a piece of furniture. It's one of the more complicated things that you have to do in ArchViz, and so that's where you use some of these more complicated modifiers. But they're pretty important, and they can be applied to all different kinds of work. To start off, I'm just going to make a really basic piece of furniture because it's just for demonstration purposes. So I've got this this box here. I'm going to start chopping it up a bit, and give me a second and I'll make a little chair. Okay, so I've blocked out a really basic massing of a chair. And the first modifier I'm going to show you is Turbosmooth. Go to the Modifiers panel and hit Turbosmooth. And you can see what Turbosmooth does is it takes this edge and this edge over here, and it interprets the connection between them and rounds them out. So when I turn this on, you'll see that this edge will round around and go over to this edge. Just like that. You can turn up the iterations on it, and you can see all the polys that it's adding to this scene. So let's that's not very useful in itself, but if we set up our polygons right, our basic polygons, then that Turbosmooth will do wonders for making this look more realistic. So let's turn it off for now, and we'll go in, and if it's interpreting what's going to happen between this line and this line, then what you need to do is put loops in between there so that it will connect between that next loop you put in, and depending on how close you put it, that tells it how much to round that corner. So if we select this whole ring of edges here and connect them and put some new edge loops in here, push them towards the edge a little bit. Now when we turn on Turbosmooth, it's going to be rounding between here and here instead of all the way across. We need to put in select another ring of edges and connect them like so. So now we'll have nice rounded edges going from there to that point to that point. And if I turn on my Turbosmooth, you'll see basically how that works. So now on that part where we just added new edge loops, you can see that it's smoothing pretty nicely there because we gave it a little more information to go off of. So now it's just rounding between this line and this line, like so. You can see my front is still rounding way towards the back. So if you go in and put another loop here, and this might be really basic to a lot of people who are familiar with polygon modeling, but the reason I'm showing it here is to demonstrate Turbosmooth and how important it is. Okay, so now we've added a new edge loop here, which now makes that front corner a nice rounded edge. And you can see we could keep going for quite a while here to get this to look like a proper piece of furniture. I'm going to hit pause on the recording for now and go in and clean some of this up, and then come back and explain some more. One thing to remember is if we are dealing with a piece of furniture, a chair like this one for example, we are not going to be seeing this bottom piece, and so we can actually just delete that, and then when the Turbosmooth edge comes to here, it will just make a nice crisp edge there because it will not smooth when there's open faces in here. So it'll look like that. So there's no rounding going on the bottom. There's some more obvious places where we need some edge loops. These tools here, this tells it how many segments, and this can slide it out to the edges. Or sorry, that's the pinch tool. And this is the slide here. Let's slide at 0. You'll see what this does. And pinch it at negative close to 100. Pinch that all the way out, or kind of reverse pinch it all the way out to the far edges. Now when we Turbosmooth again, it'll make a nice edge there. Okay. You can see that we have to go through and do this on all our edges, depending on how crisp we want them. Now let's just see what it'll look like if we smooth and keep our edge further away from the other edge, like right there maybe. Now this should make a nice round top on this thing, like that. And obviously there's some weird stuff going on here, and that's because we don't have edge loops everywhere we need them. If we put one here, real close to the edge, to make that just a tight crease in there, that'll take care of some of that problem. And what I like to do is keep this Turbosmooth on here. There we go. And you can just turn it on and off, or you can go into the sub-objects of your Edit Poly and hit Show End Result, and it will actually show what that Turbosmooth looks like, but you can still select your polys, and you know, that kind of shows you what it will do. Now watch what this does if I select this edge here and move it more like I'd want it, kind of towards this back. It makes this a much harder corner, and makes this a nice soft corner up front, because that edge loop is way back here. That's kind of starting to look like a chair a little bit. Now, see, to me this front looks too crisp, so what we can do is, you know, this is kind of more of the same, but take it in the y-axis and move it way back so we've got a nice rounded. Okay, so it's a pretty funky looking chair, but that's the basic building blocks of what you would need to do to make a chair. And in reality, you'd probably make a separate object that's smoothed nicely to be a cushion sitting on top of there, but this is for demonstration purposes. Now, another essential modifier here is going to be the Symmetry modifier. We don't want to bother. Sometimes when you get into this fine detail of these pieces of furniture, you don't want to have to do it twice on both sides. So that's where the Symmetry modifier comes in. I use it on almost every piece of furniture, because furniture's almost always symmetrical. And what that did was, it made, along this axis right here, it made, it basically mirrored this part of the polygon and symmetried it over to this side. So now it's perfectly symmetrical, and everything I do on this side will now translate to this other side. So again, you can put this Show End Result on and do this kind of stuff, and you'll see how, even though it's showing me my original poly, the Turbosmooth Symmetry poly is also shown there, and that's a good way to save speed. An important thing to remember on Symmetry is, watch these seams in the middle. You usually want them to be welded, but don't turn the threshold up so high that it starts welding pieces that you don't want welded, like that. Usually, you can put it just above 0, and that's gonna give you the result you want. Okay, so there's our super basic chair using Symmetry, Turbosmooth. Now we've got our iterations up really high on the Turbosmooth. If it was at 1, it would look a little bit choppy like that. Not very nice. 2, okay, that's pretty good. And you can you can turn this down to 0 and then turn render iterations up to 2, so that in your scene it's going to look like this, but when it renders it will look like that. So that's a good way to save you some speed on the in your viewports. Okay, on to the next essential modifier here, FFD. We'll start with the 4x4x4, which basically gives us a cage, and it's kind of similar to soft select. You can take these, go into the sub-object mode by hitting the plus next to the FFD modifier, go into the control points, and select some control points and move them, and you'll see that it does a nice kind of soft selection move of that chair. And I'm realizing now that we need, for this to work properly, we need some more edges in here. So let's go back to our original poly, connect these up a few times, maybe 3, turn the slide and the pinch down to 0, so that it gives a nice even divisions there. Apply it, and now we'll go back to the FFD. Now, okay, so now we've got a little more subdivisions going on in here, and we could even put this on top of the Turbosmooth, so we'd have plenty of subdivisions. Let's change this back to there. Now, when you select these control points, so we can make it a more funky looking chair. It's nice to use this FFD because then you can model it as a very blocky piece of furniture, but then you can go in with the FFD and kind of make it more ergonomic and more realistic looking. So anyway, most chairs would have kind of a slight curve in the back. They might flare out slightly, so you can select all of these, scale it in a non-uniform fashion in the x-axis only, kind of flare the whole chair out, all these kind of things. So now we've got this more funky chair going on. Okay, and of course it's going to depend on the subdivisions that you have in there of how smooth this is going to go, and that's why I put it over the Turbosmooth, because once you Turbosmooth it, you're going to have plenty of subdivisions in there. If we put it under, it might look a little different. It looks slightly different, but basically the same. But that is something to keep in mind. With the FFD, you can also go into FFD box, and here you can set the number of points. So you can have, let's do one with 12 points in each direction. You can see this huge lattice that it sets up here, and so you can go in and tweak really fine details of this thing. And I've seen people use this very effectively to kind of make these fine-tuning adjustments to their furniture. So you can see the kind of control that you'd be able to have. So say you want this to flare out just a little bit. Take this and kind of... Anyway, gives you an idea of what you can do with it. Now, you could also put this below the symmetry if you wanted to just do it on one side. Then the symmetry would take care of making sure it matches. That's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, let's look at another modifier now. I'm going to take this one right off of there because I'm just using it as an example. Okay, another modifier that's going to be essential is the Unwrap UVW modifier, which will take your chair and flatten out the UVs so that we can put proper texture on them. One thing I'd like to do actually before I even get into that, hold on a second. Okay, so one thing I'd like to do is set these up. Am I missing something there? I like to set these up with fabrics, let's see, or with material IDs that I want to break my pieces of fabric for the unwrap into. So I'll make this whole piece here one material ID, and where this material ID ends is where my seams are going to be. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so I'm going to have seams going right along here and right along here, which is acceptable to me. That's totally fine. And you'll see them, but that's okay, because I think in real life you could have a seam there where the fabric is sewn together, and that's okay. Excuse me. Okay, so what we'll do is just take that and set it to material ID. Set it to something that we know nothing else is set to. Set it to 10. Then we'll take this, grow it a little bit. Get some of this stuff. Oops. And then we'll need to come down the whole back with that. Anyway, I won't make you suffer through all this, but I'm just going to do this with each different area that I want as a different piece of fabric and set them all to different material IDs so that they're really easy to select when I go back into my UVW unwrap mode. So give me a second to break all this stuff up. I'll be right back. Okay, I set that to material ID 9, and then of course you can go in and hide the stuff that you've already done so it doesn't get in your way anymore. If I can find that. Hide selected. Okay, and we can go back and select number 10, select ID 10, hide that. Okay, now all that's left is these, so we'll just select those, and it's okay if those are both on the same one. Oops, make sure ignore back facing is off here. Select that whole thing. Set that ID to 8. And then we want to go in and make sure and unhide everything again. Oops. Unhide all. Where is that? There we go. Okay, now go back into the UVW unwrap. What we can do is open up our edit channel here, and we will just go into the sub-object face mode, and we can here now we can select material IDs. So we'll start with number 10, select material ID. Oh, it doesn't want to work. It's weird. What did I do wrong here? Okay, give me a sec. Okay, I've got the UVW unwrap. I'm in sub-object face mode. Okay, select material ID. Okay, I've been having a few technical difficulties here, but I've got the Unwrap UVW modifier here. I'm in sub-object face. Select material ID. Set it to 10 and hit select material ID, and it goes and selects this piece here. Now, if I have my edit window open, a good way to just break that off on its own is to just put a planar map on it. And you see what that does is just flattens it out and puts it right into there. Now I'll just lock that selection and move that away, and you can see now what that did is it put a seam at the edge of my entire selection, but nowhere else in my selection. So now I've cut that material ID number 10 away from everything else and moved it off to the side. Now if I go out of planar mode and go down to material ID 9, select that, I'll do the same thing there, planar map. Let's align it differently though. Line it in the Y, So it looks like this. That selection is already locked. Move it away from the others. Get it out of the way a little bit. Now you see I've got the material ID 10 and number 9. Go out of planar mode. Select material ID number 8. Ooh, that did not work. Well, my material ID's got messed up here, but that's okay because it's the last one left. So if we unlock selection, select this, do a planar map on it. Let's align them in the X, and then let's separate those two from each other by deselecting this one. Okay, let's see. Oh, didn't deselect it all. Okay, now I've got that one separated from the other, and I can move it like so. So it's off on its own, and then this one will be right here. Okay, so now we've got all those pieces exactly how we want them. The only one that needs serious flattening to happen, well, this one will as well. That one we might need to add a few more seams to make it work right. No, it should work fine. Okay, so what we will do now is select these different pieces, and then in this version of Max we can go in and go to Relax. Set that up higher. Let's see what we get. It's doing some wacky unfolding here. Okay, I changed it to Relax by Face Angles, and here we've got a nice flattened out piece of fabric for our chair. If we apply the checker pattern to it, ooh, needs some more relaxing, needs some more work. Okay, let's try one of these other pieces. Tools, Relax, set this a little higher so it goes faster. Okay, you can see now that one is flattened out. So this is that front part right here, and this is the seat part. And it's kind of stretched them out and made it so the checker goes uniformly all right over that edge there, which is perfect. With these arms, we'll just do the same thing. Relax. It's a little weird. Let's see. We might need to add some more seams to it. Make it right. Okay. Yeah, that definitely relaxed a little strange. So, let's see where we can put another seam in that will make this go better here. Probably in retrospect I should have maybe made this whole front piece a separate piece of fabric, and then this would have unwrapped no problem. Let's try and put in a little seam right here. I'll show you how that's done. You go Tools and Break right there. So now there's a seam right along that edge, which might help this unwrap a little easier. We'll see. There we go. Perfect. Well, there's a few oddities in here, but if we rotate this the way it needs to be, and I'm not going to spend the time to get all this unwrapping perfectly, but actually that's pretty darn clean right there. Now we could do the same thing with the other arm. This one needs to work. We might need to go in and add some other seams to this to make this work properly. Yeah, that one doesn't want to cooperate as of yet. That one probably needs some more seams to cut it to make it maybe right up here, right up this edge, and then right there. Anyway, think about where it would be cut in reality to make that fabric work on that chair. Yeah, I would definitely need a seam maybe going up right there. But anyway, that's kind of how that works, and then you can pack it all into this single square here, export it to Photoshop, and paint your texture onto it. I'm not going to go into all that here. That's for another tutorial. But once we have this unwrapped the way we want it, let me go in and show you some one more additional modifier. Okay, so we have this unwrapped. It's okay to collapse it at that point, and we can still get back to that UVW by applying that modifier again. Now let's put our Turbosmooth back on, and say we have our Turbosmooth up this high. Well, what I usually do at this point is export, once it's got UVW unwrapping going, and then I export it to Mudbox. In Mudbox I can carve all the fine detail into this, wrinkles and seams and maybe buttons in the back or whatever it is. And then I bring it back in from Mudbox. And sometimes from Mudbox you bring it in as a low poly item and you just apply the displacement maps to it and things like that. But sometimes you bring it in as the high-res model because you can afford to, and because it probably looks a little better and is a little easier than doing the displacement maps. So if that's the case, you might have a model that looks subdivided this much, or even more. I mean, that's not even that high. But you could have a very high poly model coming out of Mudbox. And a lot of times when you're carving things in 3D Studio Max, you have really high poly stuff. So the modifier to solve this problem is called ProOptimize. It comes in handy for so many different things. So if you just apply a ProOptimize and hit calculate, it'll take a minute to figure all this stuff out. Then I'll show you what you do with it. Okay, so my model, it says the vertex count is at 229,921. That's at 100%. Now, this ProOptimize works off percentages, so if you change it to 5%, you'll see what it does. It changed it to 11,496 vertices, and that's what it looks like. The big flat areas that don't need a lot of subdivisions, it takes all those subdivisions out. And wherever there's detail carved, if it's coming out of Mudbox and you have wrinkles carved all over, in those places it's still going to be subdivided heavily, but in the big flat spots it will optimize it. And you can see when I turn off the wireframe, it looks pretty much identical. So at 5% of the polygon count, it looks pretty much exactly the same. Now if you go down to like 2%, you might start seeing problems. On this chair it's still fine somehow. 1%. Now you can start seeing the wacky stuff going on. But if you put it at, we'll say 4% for this one, and convert it and collapse it back down to an edit poly, you now have a, if it's coming out of Mudbox with all that detail carved into it, you'd still have all that heavy detail, but you'd have a much, much lower poly item. So if you can afford to do it that way, I would recommend it. Otherwise, use the displacement maps and normal maps and apply them coming out of Mudbox to a simple model. Okay, so all those modifiers are used regularly to do things like create furniture. You can use them for a ton of other stuff too if you use your imagination. Hopefully all these things are helpful to you. One last thing I didn't show you, if I can undo back to where my ProOptimize was. Okay. Before you hit calculate, you need to, if you've already unwrapped this thing with a UVW unwrap, you need to make sure and keep textures. And you can see now my calculation is invalid, or my optimization is invalid. So you need to do that before you hit calculate. That way, all those seams that you made and the texture that you may have applied already will remain in the same spot, even though the geometry beneath it is changing or optimizing. So something to keep in mind, and that's kind of the workflow of making a high detailed, high poly piece of furniture using mud blocks in 3D Studio Max. But hopefully this tutorial helped you to see kind of what some of the other modifiers out there that you may not be familiar with, what they do, and hopefully you can use that to apply to various different types of situations and applications in 3D.